welcome to another episode of Sage Cigarettes Presents A Ghost in the Magazine. I'm Stef.
And I'm Elle.
And we're finally ending Daddy Cage month. It's been a long month. It's been an interesting ride. We're ending it with Vampire's Kiss, which is a movie that we covered during 31 Days of Horror. It's a quintessentially Cage movie. It's really what set the tone for him kind of being the mascot for this podcast, which will forever be a questionable decision because every time I mention it, I know people are like, Nicolas Cage? And I'm like, yeah, dude. And after seeing some of these movies, I agree, but too late to change it. So we're not going to. I'm just going to run through quickly what this movie is about because we've already talked about it a little bit. So in this movie, Nick Cage stars as Peter Lowe, who is a white guy in a suit with his hair slicked back, which is, you know, the sign of a white guy in power in the big city. It's not always slicked back, though. Sometimes that should be flying around. So Peter is a weird guy, and that seems mean because they show him going to therapy sessions and things like that. That would allude to maybe trying to fix yourself or understand yourself better, but it doesn't seem to be why he's going. He really likes to talk about himself and he just wants to be heard, and that's just another avenue for him to do so. So, you know, there is a woman who he is hooking up with, and during one of their encounters, a bat flies in the window and they get real weird. They're really weird and giggly. Does the bat even hurt him? I don't think it even touches him.
We could be like The Great Outdoors here, which is a great American film.
I love that movie.
And, you know, chase the bat out, get all suited up. But no, they just run because they're just rich city folk.
Who knows? We don't know if the bat was real or not, but we do know that the lady he was hooking up with freaking ran out the door with her titties out. Like, just grabbed her clothes. And you couldn't tell if she was screaming or crying or laughing or whatever.
She was very drunk. They were both very drunk. They shouldn't have been banging because they were past that point of intoxication where it's probably a bad idea because consent gets a little when you're both.
It's so interesting that you mentioned the word consent.
Right.
Things get a little choppy in this movie. I wish I could have thought of a bat pun for that. It's just a confusing movie. He hooks up with another lady that I'm not sure is real, the vampire Rachel, and she haunts him. And he didn't have anything on his body until he was shaving in the morning, and he cut himself shaving. And that little nick apparently just transformed into his mind as a vampire bite. He also was talking to literally no one. He brought her breakfast in bed and didn't realize she wasn't there until he went to hand her a cup of tea.
I don't even think he realized it. The filmmaker is giving us that look in that there's nobody there. And the other thing that I will say is just his way of looking at relationships. It doesn't matter if she's there. It's all about him. He's going to talk over her anyway. The thing about this film is, yes, it's weird. It's funny. I've heard people criticize it. Oh, it's so bad. But there are so many cool symbols and ways of looking at relationships, the way people view reality, hell, capitalism. I can come up with a whole anti-capitalist diatribe from this movie. It's interesting, but that scene's very interesting for that reason. You realize that this is going to be more psychological than supernatural. There are lots of signs throughout that night that something is not right.
I'm just shaking my head. And I find myself often wondering, what's Peter's sign? What's his son's sign?
I didn't even think about that. The thing about him is you see that the vampire gives him all of this, you're a genius, you're a literary genius. She says all the things he wants to hear. He sees himself as this unrecognized artistic genius, but he's just like the fucking money guy. He's just another fucking suit dummy. That's all he is. Yes. He's a fucking suit dummy.
Literally, because there's a whole scene where he just blends in with the rest of them. Okay. I don't want to forget to talk about that. So this movie surrounds him, his little madness cycle with this vampire, and he thinks that he's turning into one. So in the middle of that, he keeps blowing off the lady that he's seeing, and she puts up with a lot of weird shit. Like they had a date at the museum, and she brings him over to this piece that she clearly likes, and she looks at him like, well, like, do you like it? And he looks at her and says, I gotta take a piss.
Best line in the whole fucking movie. That's the crux of it, though. He has this opportunity to make connections. He goes to his therapist and he says, I want connections. connection. I want to feel connected to another human being. And that's what art is. I want to feel connected. He wants to be part of that art world without actually doing the work, being the artist, connecting, making the connection. He wants the love. He wants the art. He wants to be seen as a genius, but he doesn't want to do the fucking work.
I'm giggling over here because I'm a little shook because this sounds like several men I have known it.
Yep.
Several. It's wild. So, he says he has to take a piss, but he uses that as an opportunity to walk the fuck out on her. Just slips out the exit door. And I like her because she didn't just say, okay, well, he's an asshole. No, she took her happy ass, well, unhappy ass, to a payphone and let him know what a fuck he was. And she's like, don't fucking call me.
I called him a saltwater douche canoe at that point. He thinks he's so interesting. He's not. He's so fucking boring. How is he a fuck boy? Who wants to fuck that? Like, that's the thing I don't get about a lot of fuck boys that I have encountered, especially recently. They're boring. They're fucking awkward. They don't have anything that interesting to say. They might have
lack
good interest.
Emotional depth.
Exactly. It's like you can have good interest, you can be educated, but if you don't have that fucking anchor of emotion to it, you can't make that connection. I guess I could talk with the fucking nonfiction fucking book. That's the same thing. You ain't got nothing for me, bruh.
All that and a bag of chips. What else said? So these things are simultaneously happening. And then on the work front, he has a big office. He has an assistant. Her name is Alba. And he's so disgusting with Alba. It hurts me. Like, I want to jump in the screen and fuck him up on her behalf because he has this client who wants a copy of the first contract that he made with them because he wants to frame it. It's not something that has a heavy deadline, but he is making it seem like it has this crazy importance. And this is before they used computers to log things. So it's piles and piles of paper that Alba has to sift through looking for this one thing, and it was misfiled. She checked in the files it was supposed to be, and he's just talking to her, speaking to her like she's a stupid ass. And it's so aggressive.
Okay, but see how he assigns importance to weird things. He assigns importance to that bat. And that's what spurs him into using the vampire as his metamorphosis. Because we see Kafka in the window in his office. This goes parallel with the metamorphosis story. He's being changed. He's a cog in the system. He doesn't have emotional depth because he's become his job. He's become this suit dummy. And he is all about the fucking surface of things. There's no depth to him. There's no emotional depth. There's no any depth to him. That's why he's boring. He breaks down because even for people that have climbed higher in the capitalist system, there's an alienation from the individual because when you don't have that connection, you start breaking down. You don't feel like an individual. You don't feel like your life has value. You start assigning meaning to weird things like this bat. And that's why you think you're a vampire, because you saw a fucking bat once and then you had a fucking mental breakdown. And people will say this movie is trash. I read some articles and apparently some podcasters got the screenwriter to come on.
Yeah, I read that.
Fuck those guys. Probably think you're real smart and you're probably educated in film and shit. But this movie is actually very interesting for some really weird reasons. And I have watched some trash, and I am trash and I know trash. I have seen shitty movies. In this Nick Cage fueled hell month, I have seen shitty movies.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
this is not a shitty movie. There are so many interesting things in this. They throw back to Nosferatu a lot. He behaves very much like Count Orlok. The way he holds himself, the way he moves his face. And I almost feel like this is like Cage at his cagiest, but he's also trying to kind of channel Count Orlok. So you see this in other movies subsequently too. The way he acts bleeds through. So it's weird how it's like an imitation of an imitation that becomes his whole style. But I'm not a Cage scholar. I haven't seen a lot.
You know that there must be, because he has a whole fucking cult. So
yes, there are.
We should have called we should have found somebody.
We need a Cage
on Reddit. I sort of wish we had started looking for one when we found it. So I just think it's interesting, Cage at his cagiest, because when I was reading, there was something in it I didn't like that Nicolas Cage said in an interview about the movie, that he was playing the character as someone who was like desperate to find love, but the exact quote that he said sort of romanticized it a little bit, and I didn't like that because that's not really what he's doing.
Yeah, the screenwriter was also saying, I wrote this in a breakup, this relationship that sucked the life out of me. And it's like, that's really not the focus of the movie when you look
At
at it,
all. And what I think is really interesting is that his girlfriend, who was working on the film with him,
Mhm.
looked at it like, oh my God, this is the worst. And they broke up. They did not make it.
Yeah. Well,
So,
this was some nuclear waste level takes on what a relationship is, what it means to connect with people, what it means to connect with anything. Like I said, all I see is alienation from self due to capitalism, due to the way that you deal with art in not a fucking healthy or connective way.
and I feel like ultimately that would drive anybody crazy because
Mhm.
you need human interaction. Like people can die of loneliness
Mhm.
and he's not getting it and he's like literally driving himself fucking crazy. Okay, so things don't work out with the lady that he was seeing because he keeps standing her up. Like he convinced her to give him another shot, even though I would have literally cut him through the phone. Like,
Right.
how dare you call me right now? Like, back the fuck up. She still does it. And he stands her up, so that's over. He still keeps getting visits from Vampire Rachel where she's making him her bitch. He gets progressively worse with
Mhm.
Alva. So I really want to focus on the things with Alva because he's a man who's looking for romance and yet he's terrorizing this woman. And I wonder if maybe it's because he's feeling tormented by this vampire lady. And so he's just pushing it back out on Alva.
So in the very beginning, the first time he tells her to go look for the contract, they have this interaction. And as she leaves, she looks at his leg that's pulled up and he's
Oh,
not
he doesn't
wearing
have
any
socks.
socks. She's probably thinking is, haha, fancy fuck boy, But then when she leaves, he's looking at her legs too. But I think he's thinking something else.
Ew. I don't want
Because
to think that.
the thing is again, this is a surface level person who objectifies every human being he comes in contact with and isn't thinking of them as somebody that he could connect with. That's why he's lonely. His loneliness is self-imposed. And it's just like at the end when he goes through that climactic thing with the therapist in his mind. Again, whenever he's dealing with someone in his mind, they tell him what he wants to hear. And you need to think about that even when that woman is like, no, fuck you, I don't want to be with you, or like she's asking him too many things. It's because he's got walls up. He doesn't want to have that connection.
So he's getting fucking crazy with Alva to
Mhm.
the point where it's in the middle of the office. There are people around. He chases her into the bathroom. I wish a man would try to chase me into the bathroom. I will kill you. I'm small, but like, don't.
I love how
I
that
don't
old
care.
woman is just like, what the fuck's going on? And then she doesn't do
Yes.
anything.
Well, she's old. I
So
mean,
I don't care if I'm 100. I'll fight your ass.
yeah, but that's because you're incredible. And she seemed like a salty old bag. At least she said something. Because what pisses me off is that
No,
is
the whole
that's
office.
an HR scandal. Okay.
Right.
That should have you fucking fired and not able to work in that field anymore.
But
But he
here's
sits around with all the old farts at his job and they're fucking laughing about it.
Yeah.
Like, ho, ho, ho.
he is a complete cog. He can't even fail downward. He's not allowed to fail downward. They will always have his back. He is just going to stay in that same spot, and no matter what he does, he has no control over his life at this point. And
White male privilege.
it's privilege, but also he feels powerless because he can't change the way he feels. He's unable to make connections. And you see that too when he has that interaction with Rachel in the club and he says, I love you, I like you. And then she's like, no, no. And then he says, I said I love you. And then he just starts puking. And it's like, yeah, he had ingested blood, but it's like,
I mean, yeah, he
there's
did.
also this symbolic placement of that puke when he had stopped puking for a while. Seems to me like his internal resistance to even saying that he loved someone.
It did look like an allergic reaction. Like his body was like,
Yes,
no.
his body is rejecting it as much as it's rejecting blood. And he should have been puking when he was eating those pigeons too. I feel like
Okay, yeah, but that was hilarious how he just snatched a pigeon off the street and stuffed it in his jacket. So visually, the next scene is just panning across his fucking apartment floor and it's trashed and there's just blood and feathers everywhere because he ate a stupid pigeon.
another thing about his apartment is he's a fancy boy. Vampires tend to be fancy boys. They're aristocratic monsters, which is why I think he became obsessed with vampires. He's a monster, but he's a fancy monster.
Okay.
So there's this scene, and it's maybe the most famous scene in this movie. He eats a cockroach, and Nick Cage did that IRL. He wanted to do it. It was part of his whack method acting thing that he did. And he did 3 takes of eating cockroaches to get that right, I
And he was
believe.
a newer actor at the time. That's the other thing that I read. They originally cast Dennis Quaid
Yeah.
to be this person. That's
Yeah.
crazy pants because
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been nearly as bananas.
Yeah.
And Dennis Quaid was a bigger star, so he was like, I'm gonna go do this other movie.
Mhm.
And so they scooped up Nick Cage. What a national treasure.
But when he eats the cockroach, if we go back to the metamorphosis, Kafka, that anti capitalist part of it, it's almost like look at this 80s monstrosity, this new kind of capitalism that we've created, and watch it eat the old bug, the cockroach that Gregor Samsa woke up as. I was thinking about it more the other day when I was smoking a little bit, but I was thinking about this. It could also be the bug eating itself, this idea of late stage capitalism eating itself. And then we were going back to this aristocratic monster thing, the way his apartment was, that scene with the feathers and everything. Most vampires
Mhm.
are actually pretty clean. They live in like nice
Yeah.
places. He lives like a fucking
Is
cockroach.
it though?
He's
Is it?
well, at least like the enchanted version. And Peter Lowe is very obsessed with, again, that surface level, the
Mhm.
veneer, the look of it. And his place looks like a fucking pigsty. It looks like a fucking roach nest.
Because he's a roach.
Because he's fucking Gregor Samsa. This is all just my English 101 brain reading into this, because I'm pretty sure that none of this was meant. Obviously, the
No.
cockroach thing is at the last second. I
Mhm.
think Kafka might have just been a random literary figure.
I think so, because I
windowsill.
feel like this was just so accidentally amazing because
Yes.
the director was like not in an okay place at all.
Yeah. Well, the
Yes.
screenwriter, the director was a different dude. The screenwriter was coming off of working with Scorsese, which again, back to all these things that dovetail together. Our movie last week was a Scorsese movie. So,
Huh. I would say that you're like the definition of those conversations you have when you're high.
yeah, my brain is a little messy.
I love it. Okay, so how it ends with Alva is crazy pants. Alva's stressed, rightfully so. And she calls out sick one day. She's like, I'm not doing that. She had stayed till 1 a.m. to try and find the contracts, couldn't fucking find it. And her mom was like, no, you can't afford to lose this job. Like, if you know your daughter is being harassed at work, like that shit is highly abnormal. I won't tolerate any disrespect because this is a job. You just pay me, okay?
Yep.
There's no contract I signed to tolerate abuse. You don't get to speak to me however you want. Just because you're my superior does not mean that you're better than me.
Correct.
At all. Or you're my master or anything like that. I'm a free bitch. So there has to be mutual respect in the workplace. Anytime where I feel like I'm being continuously disrespected, I'm gone. I always say, this is very dramatic, but I don't care. I'd rather live in a fucking box than work for you. Full stop. So he's calling her and they're like, no, she called out sick. This man grabs a packet of soup, goes into the Rolodex and finds her address and takes a taxi over there. And he's knocking on her window and she's in her bra. You don't do that.
He always has to have the fucking upper hand.
It's gross.
Yeah.
And she's like, what are you doing here? And he's shaking the packet of soup in the window like, hello, I brought you soup. I heard you're not feeling well.
It's like, hey, soup dummy, can't you afford a can of soup for fuck's sake? You got a fucking 15-cent packet there, bitch.
I'm just saying, or even a box of packets, like, right? Or some Vicks also, like some cough syrup. They told him she had a cold. That's just very distressing to me. You can't just go in and get people's personal information, first of all. And second of all, you can't just show the fuck up. It doesn't matter who you are. You can't show up at people's homes. It's incredibly terrible. It's invasive. It's gross. So she opens the door and he's like making all these promises to her, like, hey, we're turning over a new leaf. And it was just a trap to fucking get her in the car. And then he was like, basically, I'm going to end you. Like, I'm going to eat you for breakfast. So they stop at the brother's shop and she carries a gun, but there's no bullets in it because it's just a deterrent to scare people away because she takes the subway home at night. And so he gives her blanks because they don't have actual bullets. And then they get to the office. She ends up finding the contracts, but he's spiraling in his office. He's a whole hot mess.
And this is all triggered by that cab driver and his marriage. And he idolizes that symbol, that picture of them together in their old age. Because before he goes out and attacks her, he sees them sitting there and he has this little interaction with this avatar of this old couple that he aspires towards. He wants
but
this
he
relationship.
doesn't want that even,
right?
Because that would require a whole person who talks to you every day, who lives in your space, who you have to care about
Right.
He doesn't even want that. I don't
Yeah.
understand. I don't
Right.
understand.
He comes out and comes at her. At that point, he still has some Orlok mannerisms, but there's also like a Jonathan Harker thing to him, like the hair. He's very disheveled. He's yelling, "It's too late. It's too late." It's that point in time when he's fully cracked and he's become something else. And then he chases her.
It's terrible. You don't know what he's gonna do because he's just chasing her down the fucking hallway. I couldn't imagine being in her shoes. I mean, chases her down to like a basement of the building or something like that, and there's nowhere else for her to run. She turns around, she says, "Stop or I'm gonna shoot you." And he's like, "Do it,
Yep.
do it."
He's trying to prove he's immortal. He convinces himself once he attacks
Uh,
her and everything because it's Blinks.
oh my god! I'm sorry. That didn't even register to me.
It's Blinks. The thing I hate the most about this scene, though, I have to say, is that whole tongue wag he makes before he says,
I didn't notice that the first time around. That's why I'm saying this time watching it was so much worse for me because when he did that, I literally shrieked. Well, first of all, it's disgusting and like I'll rip your tongue out of your mouth. But it reminded me of last October when I discovered that there were two versions of that scene in The Exorcist where she's walking down the stairs backwards. Well, in the one that I watched that fucked me up for days, she did that little tongue waggy thing when she flipped over. It's Satan. He's Satan. He may not be a vampire, but he's a devil. Okay. He's a disgusting creature. And I understand that he's going through,
mental
he's
breakdown.
going through some things. However, that does not excuse any of it.
Honestly, the picture that we get of this guy previous to this, when he cracks, he just goes down the drain. He already was circling. His behavior is becoming more erratic, but he's doing the same selfish bullshit things that he was doing before. The first time I watched this movie, I think I had come into it thinking it was a horror movie and like suspending some disbelief before. But now I'm seeing all of these points where it looks like the filmmakers are giving us big hints that this is not supernatural, this is psychological, that I didn't maybe pick up on as much the first time I watched it. Oh, Steph, I just saw a note that how you were talking about the bird in the suit. Tell me that bird would not shit all over inside that suit.
Yeah, like a panic shit. Like, what? Why are you grabbing me? I mean, we don't know that there wasn't shit.
I just want to imagine him covered in bird shit underneath his clothes.
Yeah, and then I know he didn't wash that bird before he ripped the feathers off. So I would like to think that he also ate shit.
The other thing I want to mention about this is there's this accent that he puts on. It's supposed to be pseudo Transylvanian, but I don't get that at all.
No, it's not.
Weird.
It's nasally asshole is the accent he used here.
It's bourgeois is what it is.
It has to hurt to force yourself to talk that way. I would like to think that after getting home from a long night of filming, he had to drink several cups of hot tea with lemon and honey. Even if you don't want to sit through this movie, which is valid, YouTube a clip or something so that you can hear. Or a better alternative is watching Color Out of Space because he definitely revisits it briefly. So
I like this movie. It challenges me to think about things and like maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there.
Yeah, but like everything is open for interpretation in any form of media. Books, movies, music videos. I'm looking at you, Montero. Everything's really up for interpretation. And I would like to think that the people who create these things, when they see something they didn't even think of, they're like, wow, I hear where you're coming from. I totally do. But when I watched this movie, I put myself in Alba's shoes for whatever reason. And I can't, probably because I've worked in places dominated by white men who just, they're like, well, what I want is, I think, without respecting other people. It's not to that extreme, but like I really sympathize with her and it gave me mad anxiety. So
I can see that,
yeah.
After that whole interaction, he is completely off his rocker now. It's after that point that he goes to the club.
Well, he has to buy his teeth first.
Oh God, the teeth.
And this whole thing bothers the fuck out of me, okay? I mean, I have perused the freaking parties of the aisle trying to decide if I want the expensive teeth or the fake plastic teeth that are much cheaper. You make bank, you wear a suit to work. Get the expensive ones, you cheap ass.
It shows only a few bucks in his wallet, but there's also plastic in there. Like he has a credit card.
Saying. But he's like, no, it's a weird.
Okay, so here's the thing. The way he's resistant, he talks about the bat makes him horny the first time he goes into the therapist. And then later on, when she tries to bring it up with him, he comes up with all these things and tries to bury that lead. He tries to bury everything about the vampire. He doesn't want to talk about it. There's a point in this movie before he completely cracks where he realizes that the world of the vampire, he's creating an his head, but he isn't cognizant of that. But that world is incompatible with the outside world. So maybe putting it on his credit card, having a paper trail to it would be cutting that.
See,
I noticed that throughout the movie where he was just trying to compartmentalize it at first. Once the situation happened with Alva, it kind of broke.
it's very Peter Lowe. Yeah, okay, so he gets his teeth and then he goes to a club. I can't.
One more thing about the teeth, though. The way he acts with the teeth in his mouth is exactly Tom Cruise's Lestat. And I did that Photoshop and it did not gain traction, but it should have.
We're going to reshare it now that we're talking about it.
Okay, so he goes to this club. He's, again, this fuckboy on his game, trying to get at this
But
girl.
with big old plastic vampire teeth in his mouth.
Better than the boring guy that was approaching the girls at the bar before.
Absolutely not. Unless it's Halloween. No, thank you. But I wouldn't be sitting alone
True.
at a club in the first place. All I kept thinking was, where are her friends?
I guess I had this problem with this fucking 5 when he opens his mouth, a 3, gating with all these 10s.
Seriously, because the girl that he was hooking up with and kept giving him the chances, she was beautiful.
She was gorgeous. So is a vampire. These girls, come on, you're boring.
Dude, I don't know. Maybe like women are just like, wow, you put care into your appearance, even though you've got fucking plastic vampire teeth in your mouth.
You put care into your appearance. Oh my gosh. We have such low standards, all of us. I'm including myself in this.
Yes, I would like to apologize. I probably wouldn't even talk to a dude who approached me with a suit because I'm like, oh, I drive a Honda. Like, why are you over here? Like, why are you here? Like, please
Right.
go away. I don't know what you're doing here. Like, how did you get here? You seem sus. Like, no, thank you.
Okay, so he bites this girl. He takes his teeth out and bites her with his actual teeth.
Which is so fucking redundant. Obviously, you're not a vampire if you can't even use your vampire teeth, man.
And then he has this interaction. He runs away, sees Rachel with some
With her
dude,
new
or-
man's.
There's a big outburst. He gets tore out of the bar. Now he's just wandering the street being a weirdo.
Being a creep. And he's having this conversation with his therapist, but she's not there. He's in the street. He's got blood all over his mouth, his shirt. Why no one has arrested him at this point is beyond me.
The funny
But I
thing-
did notice, because in New York, I guess people just mind their fucking business because people were just like moving around him, barely giving him a second glance, like, nope, not my business. Nope, that's not
Mhm.
my problem. Nope, not dealing with that today.
Somewhere I read that they backed off of him with the long distance lens when they shot that. So those were actually like people's interactions on the street coming in contact because he wasn't a big star then. He was just a guy having a bad day on the sidewalk.
Covered in blood. Like his mouth was literally covered in blood. Talking to no one who's there, but he's like shrugging and he's talking with his arms, and there's no one by him. But I guess that is a common occurrence in the city.
I would
Must
know.
be.
He has this long conversation with the therapist on the sidewalk where the therapist eventually like gives in because he says, I'm not talking about a fairy tale love, but a mature relationship. Like that's gonna fix me. That's what he says to his therapist. And this delusional version of his therapist is like, well, why didn't you tell me that? Let me hook you up with the lady who comes in after you that's looking for the exact same thing. And
Which is a huge no-no.
Right,
No
HIPAA
therapist would
violation.
ever, right. No one would ever do that.
And then again, these people in his fantasy world tell him everything he wants to hear about how great he is. It's just an id release. People get murdered all the time in this city. These things happen. He also like creams himself when this chick recites some poetry to him. And again, there's no emotional connection. It's just like, this is what I like. You are like me. But there's no connection to the work. There's no connection to the person. And by the time he gets home, because he's like taking this girl home with him, he's already like, fuck you. Why would you ask me that? I hate you. And you're not seeing the other side of the conversation anymore because the film's kind of backed out of his mind.
He's, having his little episode, breaks up with his new imaginary girlfriend or whatever. So his couch is flipped upside down so that he can crawl like a coffin. Meanwhile, while he's having this episode, Alva tells her brother what happened. And so he goes to handle business and he gets into this guy's apartment and he stakes him through the heart. Poetic justice.
Okay, so a few things on that last scene. He does a motion where the stake is his cock for a moment, which is funny. It cracked me up. And then the brother comes in and he's doing this and he's like, that definitely punctures a lung. And the first thing he does is gasp. He ain't gasping. That was my only nitpick with it.
You would.
The last thing we see, the camera pans to the window where it started, this trashed apartment that was once a pretty fancy place. And then we see a shot of the city outside. As like how many other stories are like this alienation from themselves, from connection, from society. There's just all of these layers and layers of symbolism you can find in this. I mean, here I am with my English 101 brain finding them, but it's interesting. I like this movie for that reason. There are a lot of things that make me uncomfortable. The screenwriter's intent makes me very like, it's so interesting what fucking snowballs out of that art, put through the right filters and through other creative people, it can roll into something kind of cool.
Yes.
And that's what this did. The things that I think are cool about it have nothing to do with the relationship aspect. This is a person who does not understand how connection works at all.
I don't have any final thoughts. That is the end of Daddy Cage Month. Don't you worry. We're never going to do it again.
This was a bad idea. That was instigated by me.
Yes, this is her fault. Happy early birthday. Next month, we're going to start creature features, and that's my freaking jam. And we're starting with my favorite creature feature, Deep Blue Sea. I am terrified of the ocean, and sharks scare the fuck out of me, and this movie is perfect, so join us. You can find the podcast on Twitter at GITM Podcast. You can find me on Twitter at WitchXPudding.
Don't find me on Twitter, but I'm at Nocturnical.
Okay, bye!